I think that's more what peer support gave me, was a hope after my diagnosis. It was like, I hear a lot of people say this, but my schizophrenia diagnosis did feel a bit like a death sentence. I felt like schizophrenia took so much from me, and getting a job just was another thing that I felt like I got to take back. And so a lot of my advocacy is just trying to hopefully help some other people struggling with schizophrenia be able to take back stuff like I have, like the ability to drive, the ability to be able to work a job, and the ability to, have a healthy, functional relationship, all things that I lost.
Kody Green has come a long way, and he's using his journey to help others. Our guest on this episode is patient advocate, motivational speaker, and now author, the schizophrenic hippie, Kody Green. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Well, I wish I had noisemakers. I wish I'd thought of it, because this is episode number 100. Ding, 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 ding. Very exciting. And I'm so excited. Who knew 4 years ago when we started this podcast that we would still be here, still doing it? And to mark the occasion, we have a most amazing guest this evening. And I think we're going to jump right into it. So if this is your first time listening to our podcast, rather than introduce ourselves to you, the listener, we're going to introduce ourselves to our guest, Kody Green, who, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see his face right now. Kody Green is known as the schizophrenic hippie, at least on TikTok. And this episode I'm titling From Incarceration and Addiction to Advocacy and Motivational Speaking. And we're delighted to have you on our 100th episode. Kody is a patient advocate. He lives with schizophrenia, and he's a content creator with, I'm a little jealous, over 1 million followers on TikTok alone, with a presence on many, many other platforms, including Cameo. I can't even believe that, but we'll talk about that later. And Kody is such a beacon of hope for me as a mom. He's overcome struggles with drug addiction and incarceration, two things my own son is struggling with right now. And he shares information on his platform to be a better advocate and speaker. He's been trained as a peer support specialist, a recovery coach, and suicide prevention specialist. Kody, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
We are delighted. So since I'm talking, I will just introduce myself first. My name's Randy, and I have a son who does not want his real name revealed, and so we call him Ben. In my book, Ben Behind His Voices. And he is just, fingers crossed, a month away from graduating from jail diversion and really excited to restart his life. So he is diagnosed with schizophrenia. He doesn't really believe it, but we are where we are. And that's a bit about me. Mimi, you want to go next?
Hi, nice to see you again. Remember, we met at the NAMI in the convention in Denver. Everybody's very excited to have you around. I have a 38-year-old son with schizophrenia, and just happy you're here.
And Mimi's book is He Came In With It. Mindy.
Hey, Kody. We had a couple, I guess, Michael Brisbane on, I don't know, last month or so, and with his mother, and he and his friend Jasper were interviewed by you at the convention, and he was just so pumped and excited and in awe of you. So you are really a role model. My son is 46, and he has been in jail 3 times and now is in the hospital for almost a month. He's on his 17th day of his second stay this month. And I think I would prefer the hospital to jail. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
And Mindy's book is called Fix What You Can. Her family's story interspersed with getting stuff done on a state legislative level. So we each have different approaches, but a whole lot of love and advocacy for our sons. So Kody, welcome to the podcast. I think we're just going to ask you, you've done this a million times, I'm sure, to tell us your story and let us pop in with questions as they come up. Does that work for you guys? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So, my journey with schizophrenia actually started before my diagnosis. I was raised by a mother with schizoaffective disorder. So, I do have the unique perspective of being both a caregiver and a person living with schizophrenia. And I really do appreciate that perspective as I've come into advocacy. But my very first introduction to understanding schizophrenia and psychosis was actually, having to become a caregiver at a very young age. I was raised by a single mom who, in her late 20s, early 30s, started experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations as well as delusions and paranoia. And so it wasn't until I was in high school that she finally got a proper diagnosis and was on medication that was actually showing to be effective for her. And it was right around that time that I was looking at going off to college. And so my first year of college, I started having those very same symptoms myself. And so, despite knowing what I know about schizophrenia, the illness really made it impossible for me to understand what was happening. I would say that even at that point in my life, I understood more about the illness than a lot of people, but that didn't really help when I was having delusions and I was incapable of recognizing that I was struggling. And so instead of reaching out for help, I tried to cope with using drugs and alcohol, which eventually led to me being incarcerated. And so that was several years of my life struggling with addiction, struggling with incarceration. And it wasn't until I was released that I was able to get proper help, be able to get into a psychiatrist, be able to reach out and start seeing success with medication and treatment. And then after that part of my journey, several years later, I started attending peer support groups. I started learning more about schizophrenia. And I always tell people I don't think anyone means to become an advocate. I think it's something that is kind of set in front of you. And so I just wanted to help people better understand schizophrenia and mental illness in general. And so I started posting about it on social media and very quickly grew a following and saw how beneficial telling my story was, not just for other people living with schizophrenia, but for friends and family members who want to better understand the illness, and also for doctors and psychiatrists to see what they might not be hearing from their patients and what their patients might be too afraid to tell them. And so really just trying to advocate on every front when it comes to schizophrenia. And I've been very lucky to have the reach that I've had, and I'm just trying to be a voice for people like my mom or like your sons who might never get to share their stories.
You said that it didn't help you to have your mother be ill because you still didn't recognize it in yourself. How about your mother? Did she recognize it in you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very lucky. I always tell people I know that a lot of individuals struggling with schizophrenia or homelessness or addiction might not have the support that I had. Both my mom and my wife, pretty early on, were able to tell what was going on. It didn't really, and this is something I hear unfortunately very commonly is people will reach out and say, I understand this is what's going on, but my loved one can't understand that this is what's happening. And so although they did recognize it, it still took several years for me to be able to, finally reach out and ask for help and be able to get the assistance I needed. And when I first reached out for help, I didn't reach out thinking that I had schizophrenia. I just started recognizing that I couldn't do what everyone else could do. I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't, go back to school. And so it was just, I reached out more because I wanted to know why I couldn't, do what everyone else was doing and why I couldn't keep up with my peers. I didn't believe that I had schizophrenia at the time of my diagnosis. And even several months into taking medication, I didn't really believe that. And so it wasn't until, I had been very well established on medication and I was able to start, gaining some clarity that I really recognized that that was what I was struggling with.
Yeah. Wow. So I can tell that you've told this story many times, and I appreciate the beautiful nutshell that you've told it in. Can we go back a little bit? Because I have
Yeah.
some questions.
Oh,
First of
absolutely.
all, are you an only child?
I'm not. So I actually have a little brother and a half sister, both of which, kind of became caregivers for my mom as well.
So are you the oldest then? You're the oldest
I,
son? And how
yep.
old were you when your mom started um, behaving not like mom? I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. I was pre-teens, early teens. So I was quite young. And my mom was, it was just little things. It started very subtly. She would get like paranoid. She would start thinking that, people were touching her food, or that people were doing certain things around the house, or like people were trying to listen in to the conversations we were having in the house. And, it quickly led to delusions and hallucinations. And, as kids, we didn't really know what we were looking at. We couldn't really identify what was going on. And so for several years, she lived undiagnosed. She was trying to get help pretty much the entire time. Something about her mom instinct. She just knew that she was unwell and needed to, once again, not knowing that it was schizophrenia, but she knew that she needed to get some sort of help. And it took, uh, well over 5, 6 years for her to get proper diagnosis. And that's where I always say I'm very lucky, because from the time I was started having symptoms to the time I was diagnosed, even though for me it felt like decades, struggling with addiction and incarceration, I was really only going through that time period for about 2.5 years, because I started having symptoms at 18 and I was diagnosed at 21. So a little bit probably closer to 2.5, 3 years. But a lot of people go much, much longer without a proper diagnosis, and that can lead to severe cognitive issues and all sorts of other issues that can come up too.
So thank you. How did that play out for you? Now you've mentioned a wife, so clearly you're married, and we've spoken, briefly about everything you're accomplishing right now. And you're how old? 28, 29?
I turned 30 this year, so in
Oh,
October.
October what?
22nd.
Okay. I'm the 11th. I just thought maybe.
Congratulations.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, all right, now you're an old 30-year-old. So,
Yeah.
but for the benefit of people who may be just at the beginning of this journey, I will mention that for many women, schizophrenia appears later in life. And of course, there are exceptions, but in terms of numbers, for men, it does start earlier, as it did with you. And so the later that schizophrenia develops, the better your chances of being aware that you have it, because you've had a chance to grow up kind of beforehand. So like you, many of our sons started exhibiting symptoms earlier, mid to late teens. And my son also, things really went off the rails at 18 and no diagnosis till he was 21. So, we can relate to that. You kind of said, well, drug addiction and incarceration. Are you willing to say more about that? What brought you into a place where you were incarcerated? Was it just you were caught with pot, or whatever you're willing to say about it? But you seem like an open book. So.
Yeah, of course. So for me, it was, I mostly used stimulants was my primary addiction. And the reason for that was a lot of my paranoia led to me being afraid to be sedated or go to sleep, because I thought if I went to sleep, someone would lock me up or put me in a psychiatric facility. And so I used primarily stimulants, and my incarceration was because of possession and other drug related crimes. And so it was very much a result of me not getting early intervention and treatment, and unfortunately thinking that for some reason that was all I thought that would help, and I didn't feel like there was anything else I could do to cope. And so that's what I ended up using as a coping mechanism. And it's so unfortunate. I hear so many of the same stories from other people struggling with schizophrenia, or honestly, most mental illness. We see very high rates of addiction. And one of my hopes is that by sharing my content, I just hope that even if one person sees it and recognizes some of the symptoms in themselves and it prevents them from using drugs as a coping mechanism, that's a win, you know?
How about your path out of incarceration? What was that like for you? How'd you get
Yeah,
out of
so
it?
I actually, when I was incarcerated, when I was still in jail, is when I started recognizing that, something might be wrong with me, and I started asking for help. And unfortunately, our current jail and prison systems in America aren't really set up for helping people who are struggling with severe mental illness or psychosis. And so, despite asking for help, I couldn't see a doctor. I wasn't able to get to a mental health professional. I was told that because I had a passive addiction, that me trying to meet with a doctor was me trying to seek for drugs. They thought I was just trying to find a way to get drugs. And so it became very difficult to ask for help. So it wasn't until I got out of jail that I was able to finally get a doctor's appointment and a referral to a psychiatrist. And little did I know that when I reached out to my wife and my mom, and I said, "Hey, I think something might be wrong. I just want to talk to someone." I didn't know that over those past 2, 3 years, they had been gathering resources. They had a doctor ready for me. They knew what psychiatrist I could get referred to. And because of my mom's diagnosis, I got through that. I got through that process very quickly because it was easy for them to recognize that I had these symptoms and I had the genetics from my mom. And so I think I got, once I started my first psychiatry appointment, I was through to medication within a matter of a couple of weeks. And so I was, it was a very streamlined process because of, the efforts of the caregivers around me, but also because of, my mom's diagnosis. And no one should have to have genetic family predisposition to, get that early care and early treatment, but that's kind of what led to me getting through the system a lot quicker.
How long were you in jail? You mentioned 2 to 3 years, but I'm assuming you mean that the time that it from 18 until you were diagnosed, not how long you were in jail, right? How long were you in jail?
My longest stretch was 6 months. So
a long time to not get, so you didn't get screened for mental illness. And even when you asked, you didn't get to see a doctor. That's outrageous. What state, I should know, but what state were you in when you were in jail?
I was in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Wow.
So I'm in Minnesota, and we actually, I think, do better than that. I'm sure there's cases where we don't. We have a task force right now that was just enacted by the legislature to do even better. But when my son has been in jail, he's always gotten his medication in Minnesota, not when he was in Montana, however.
Yeah. No, Wisconsin, and it's, this has also been, I was released in 2015. So my hope is that almost a decade later, my hope is that they're doing better. But that's, the frustration I think we all have as advocates is seeing where things should be and realizing that they're not as far as they need to be. But there's definitely some states that are way further ahead and more established and providing different types of care. And when I was screened, the only question they asked me is if I was suicidal, and that was it. And then it was booked in and nothing after that.
Wow. Were your family allowed to visit?
Yeah. Yep. I was, I was still able to do phone calls and visits. And so that was at the time it was not super great for me because I was still in a very bad place mentally. And so I couldn't even, I don't think I could even recap a single one of those visits because I was in such a bad place. And, it's a big chunk of my life that I can look back on and not remember a ton about because, I wasn't getting the help I needed and I was still very, delusional and I was still struggling a lot with, at that point, because I was incarcerated, it was struggling with withdrawals and sobriety and like kind of getting back into functioning without any sort of like distraction or substance, but it was still incredibly difficult without the proper resources.
Do you still need support to stay sober from the other substances, or is that a thing from your past now?
I'm far enough into my sobriety that I'm comfortable telling people that I'm a recovering addict. I still say recovering because I don't think anyone is, ever fully recovered. I think it is an ongoing process. I do think that if I'm not careful, I could end up back in a situation where I'm struggling with addiction. But overall, I did peer support for a long time when it came to my addiction. Now I'm pretty stable and I'm pretty comfortable managing it on my own. But there was a long period of time where I attended groups and I was able to meet with other people who were struggling. And it's also how I got introduced to mental health peer support groups was through NA and AA. So that was how I learned about like groups like NAMI, and that's how I started attending different mental health peer support groups too.
It's a really obviously inspiring story, and it does my heart good to hear it. So here's what I'm wondering. I don't know if it sounds like you had a journey to acceptance or out of anosognosia. It doesn't sound like there was one moment where you went, oh, I know what it is, right? So before you were ready, if a peer support specialist had come to you and said, Kody, listen, I know I know you don't think you have this schizophrenia, but trust me, you have it. I've got it. Let me talk to you. Do you think you would have accepted that help or rejected that help because you weren't quite ready?
I don't know. It's really hard to say. I will say that I think, and looking back is so difficult because it's hard to tell what's delusion and what's like what actually happened. But I do think there was very brief periods where I thought maybe it's something I could be struggling with, but I don't think I ever reached out because of the stigma surrounding. Like I knew how people looked at my mom after her diagnosis. I remember dealing with people judging her for taking medication. We grew up in a very small town in the Midwest. Mental illness isn't talked about, and when it is, it's never talked about positively. So I think if I ever did have those moments of like clarity, I think I shoved it down because I didn't want the diagnosis. I didn't want to be labeled as crazy. I didn't want to be the 18-year-old kid on a bunch of medication. And like I said, it's hard to say. I don't know for sure, but I can think of moments where I believed that I thought that, and I just tried to act like that wasn't the problem. And so I don't know that it would have been effective had a peer told me otherwise. All I know is once I started having some clarity, talking with peers changed my entire perspective on the illness and my outlook for the future. So I think that's more what peer support gave me was a hope after my diagnosis. It was like I hear a lot of people say this, but my schizophrenia diagnosis did feel a bit like a death sentence. I had never known anyone living a full functional life with the illness. Movies, TV shows, everything like that doesn't ever portray someone with mental illness or schizophrenia in a very positive light. And so I really didn't expect that I would ever get to do much in my life. And had it not been for peers and a supportive care team, I think I would have given up. I don't think I would have pursued all the things I did.
Well, I have a
Did you
question.
have a peer specialist
Hang
or?
on, I think Mimi was going first and then Mindy.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, it's just, this is the thing that always happens to us is when we see someone like you, we're like, why not our son? Yes, got treatment quickly and got on medication. My son was badly medicated for 15, 16 years before we found clozapine. And his change since clozapine has been astounding, but because of all those years of being diminished, I don't know that he will ever come back to where he might have been. But my question is, what do you think is the difference between somebody like you who obviously is functioning, completely in your life? Do you think it's because you have really great medication that works really well with you? Or what do you think makes the difference between a recovery like yours and most of the rest of the recoveries?
Yeah, I think I think medication plays a huge role. I tried medications that worked well for others that didn't work well for me, and that's why, like in on social media and stuff, I never say exactly. I don't say brands or anything like that. I do tell people now that on a long-acting injection, and that's given me a lot of freedom back, and it makes me feel like a little bit better day to day. I deal with a little bit less symptoms, but for me, I really think it is the um, early intervention, because even in the difference between me and my mom went many years without a diagnosis, and she really still struggles cognitively, and she was never able to return to work. She's still on disability, and uh, it's really difficult because I almost feel guilty sometimes. I think I can relate a little bit to what you were saying about your son. You see, like, even me, I feel so grateful to be functioning and doing well, but then I see my mom and I'm like, well, why can't she also have this amazing opportunity to basically rebuild her life? She never really got that. And it's super frustrating. And so, like I said, I think that's what gives me a really cool perspective, not cool, but interesting perspective as a person with schizophrenia and as a caregiver. Because when caregivers reach out to me, I understand that frustration. I also understand like how upsetting it can be, and for me, it's a little bit more intricate too, because I do feel guilty. There are a lot of people struggling that I don't think will ever get to be as, functional day to day as I've been able to get. And that's my hope with, advocating, is just trying to get people earlier intervention, or get more research into schizophrenia so we can figure out how to prevent a diagnosis to begin with. And so every time we see a new advocate, I think, there's one more person that's hearing this message. There's one more person becoming more aware of schizophrenia, and hopefully one more person getting early treatment and early intervention.
I can see why your podcast is so popular. And you mentioned, cool. I think that that's not usually what we think of with a person with schizophrenia. And I think that's part of your popularness is you are cool. That's something that Michael talked about when he was on here, how cool you are. I think it is very cool to have a podcast by a person with schizophrenia who is really cool. I had a question that I was going to ask. Did you have any role models? Did you have peer specialists? You're young enough. Our children didn't have them. They didn't exist when our kids were first diagnosed. But did you have role models that were peer specialists, either formal?
Oh, Mindy, you're cutting out a bit, but I think you said either formal or informal. Was that the last part of your sentence?
Or informal that helped you binge. Oh, yeah. And I don't even have a storm, so I don't know what's going on here.
It's the internet.
Technology.
Kody, you heard the question though, right?
Yep. So I did have, I always, despite her having her struggles and not getting to the same, level of stability that I have, my mom was always a huge role model for me, because, she was able to do all of these things while struggling with a severe mental health diagnosis. And for a large part of her adult life was undiagnosed. So she was a very, close personal role model. When it came to like advocacy, I actually found Gabe Howard and Michelle Hammer, who have a podcast called Schizophrenic, Bipolar, and a Podcast.
Yeah.
And
Friends
you guys are all nodding your head.
We know them well.
Yep. Yeah. So they were really my first introduction, I think, to like public advocacy for mental illness. And I didn't find them. My wife was trying to find ways to better help me and better accommodate my struggles. And she found their podcast in the years where, I was finally seeing success with medication, and I was trying to learn more about the diagnosis, and I was attending local peer support groups, but I hadn't really started doing advocacy myself. And hearing people talk so openly and honestly about mental illness and schizophrenia, even the uncomfortable parts, that gave me a lot of hope. And it was also seeing people that were living, full, functional, happy lives. They had relationships. They had friends and family members that, didn't disown them just because of an illness or diagnosis. And I saw all these things, and I'm like, well, if other people can do it, why can't I, And so they're just two of the now very many advocates that I've been able to connect with and learn from. But early on, I think they were a huge part of my journey.
That's amazing. I have to tell you that. So my son is in a jail diversion program. So we get a 15-minute phone call a day, and it's fine. I'll take it. It's better than, looking through a glass in jail. So, but I do have access to his email because I can write to him. I also have the password because he's job hunting. And it's so funny if any listener to the podcast knows 6 months ago, I was like, oh my God, my kid's in jail. What are we going to do? And, we never know what's going to happen. But right now, as I've said before, I'm daring to hope. And so is he. And he's getting job counseling. And the job counselor says, oh, Ben is the highlight of my week. So that just did my mother's heart really, like she loves when because he's trying really hard to get work. I think until his teeth are fixed, it's going to be difficult because he wants to go back to being in the restaurant business. But I convinced myself a long time ago, sort of, that it's not my job to convince my son that he has schizophrenia because no one can do that. But I went on your YouTube channel and subscribed and saw my son is also on a long-acting injectable. So much as I loved how Clozaril was for him, it's not what he's on now. And so he's on an injectable, and we're not going to mention names. I know you don't like to do that, and I'm fine with that. But because my son probably should have been born in the 60s and loves the Grateful Dead, and, Schizophrenic Hippie was like right up his alley. So I sent him a link to your YouTube video where you talk about how the long-acting injectables are helpful to you. And I'm not going to belabor the point. I just sent it to him. So I asked him on the phone yesterday. He says, yeah, I started. And I told him a little bit about you. So he might watch it. But that's the most we can do because it has to come from him somehow. And it may or may not come. But I think the fact that you are a peer advocate is and also Kevin Early, another one who is the early bird. I don't know if you know Kevin, he was on our podcast and he also went through jail diversion, and he's also has a master's in social work. So the fact that you are using your experience to help others, and it sounds like you had family support, which is awesome. And you're giving people hope. Can I just ask how your brother and half sister are doing right now?
Yeah, so my little brother is kind of getting past, he's 28 now, I think. So he's kind of getting past the typical age range for men to develop it. He's doing very well. He did struggle with addiction early on in his adulthood, but he didn't really have any episodes of psychosis or anything like that. So we're almost in the clear for him just based on age range. And my little sister is quite a bit younger. And given that, women do develop the illness later in life, she's someone, we're always kind of keeping an eye on and making sure she knows we're here if we need anything. Because my mom struggles with schizoaffective disorder, which is schizophrenia, and a mood disorder like bipolar. My little sister did develop bipolar disorder, and she is treated for that, and she's found success with medication. And so it hasn't been too much of a barrier in her life, but it's definitely something that we're all aware of, and we, let her know that we're there to help if she needs it.
Important. And I have one more nosy question. Did your wife know when she fell in love with you that you had schizophrenia?
So me and my wife, my wife is such a big part of my story, and I can never have enough time to talk so much about her. But my wife actually started dating me about a year and a half before I ever showed any symptoms of schizophrenia. And she was with me through the entire, like everything I just described, you guys. She was with me through all that. So she was with with me when I started having symptoms. She stayed with me through my addiction. She was there when I was incarcerated. And so I'm, eternally grateful for her because she was by my side the whole time. And she's a large reason that I, reached out for help because, when I said that I was like, I could tell something wasn't right, a big part of that was I just felt like I was letting her down. I was letting my mom down. And it wasn't really about me. Like I said, I didn't think I had any issues, but I didn't want to let her down because she had been with me that whole time. And, everyone is always very nice about me and my journey. And I did do a lot, as an individual going through all of this, but she was there for every step of the way. And, I wouldn't be here if not for her and her sacrifices through all those different issues that I dealt with. So.
Wow. So I had a question here. Did he have family support? But I think you've answered that. Tell us about your upcoming book.
Yeah, so it just became available for pre-order, and I didn't expect props to you guys because it sounds like you guys are all authors. I didn't expect writing a book to be as difficult as it was.
Oh my God, it sucks the life out of you.
Oh my goodness. It was a great experience. I'm always so grateful to be able to share my stories and everything, but I think I'm going to take a break from writing books for at least the foreseeable future. But it's specifically about mental health and mental illness in the workplace. And the reason I felt like it was necessary for me to write about it was because as soon as I got medication, I was very lucky that I was able to get back into working. And although I did lose several jobs and I had workplaces that were not, great for understanding what I was going through, I started finding that some employers had different resources that I could use. And some employers, once I started explaining my diagnosis and everything going on, were actually really accommodating. And because we do have, disability accommodations, I wanted to write a book so that people could kind of hear my story about what it was like going through the workplace. I worked in so many different industries, and some jobs went really well, some jobs did not. I talk about what it was like before my diagnosis, after my diagnosis, applying for different accommodations or trying to use things like FMLA just to be able to keep my job if I needed time off. And so
SMLA, just explain it if someone doesn't know what that is.
Yep. So FMLA is Family Medical Leave Act, and that
FMLA,
would be
okay.
Yep. And that would be, it's a lot of times used for someone who's a caregiver for someone with a illness or disability, but employees can use it for themselves too in certain jobs and roles. And so basically it just let me take unpaid time off so that I didn't lose my job if I did have a short psychiatric stay or something like that. So I just really took all of these experiences I had and put them into a book so that people could understand that a lot of the times, we see such high rates of unemployment for people with disabilities, but it's not always because people with disabilities aren't, there's this idea that people with disabilities aren't willing to work. All I wanted was a job. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to have an income. I wanted to be able to buy things, and I never thought that was going to be possible. And once I started working, I realized the problem wasn't me, it was employers. It was people not willing to understand my diagnosis, not willing to accommodate my diagnosis. And I can't fix that. So, finding ways to talk with your employer, with HR, and find accommodations is a big part of the book. And I also talk about burnout, how to deal with that. And I also featured stories with, and I just mentioned them, but I was actually able to interview both Gabe and Michelle for this book, and they kind of share some of their experiences of, mental health and mental illness in the workplace. And so it was a really great experience, and I'm super excited that I was able to do it. I hope that it becomes a resource for people, not just people struggling with mental illness, but also I wrote a few chapters specifically for leaders and HR and employers so that they can understand what they can do to be a more accommodating workplace. Unemployment is hitting some of the highest or some of the lowest numbers right now, and they need more talent in the workplace. And so at some point, they're going to have to be more accommodating. They're going to have to understand that some people need, assistance and need help, and they want to work, but they can't find a job willing to accommodate them. And so it's called Minds Over Meetings, and that's kind of the idea of it. I know that was a probably longer description than what you guys needed, but I am,
it's an important topic. It's a really important topic. So
yeah,
it's so important. I want to insert a factoid here that you may have in your book, but it's something like 20% of people with serious mental illnesses who are working, and it's like 80 to 90% who want to work. So that part of your story is so important.
Yeah. And
it's all my son wants out of life, right? It's all he wants. He, he wants to be able to buy a shirt that he doesn't have to budget into his SSDI. And he wants to work. And looking at his history, when in a period where before COVID, where he was doing really well, there were restaurant jobs he lost. He does not disclose because he doesn't believe he has schizophrenia, but interviewing some of those employers, they knew it.
Yeah.
They knew it. They just didn't tell him they knew it, but they got him. Like, they got his quirkiness and they got his good humor, and it is, but he's also lost jobs because people didn't get him, and they didn't.
And so he didn't ask for accommodation. So
no, because he doesn't have schizophrenia as far as he's concerned, and he also doesn't have a drug problem as far as he's concerned. So we'll see where that goes. But right now, right now, it's a good day. So,
yeah,
but having a job, I think he's supposed to see his job coach once a week, and he probably goes every day. He just wants it. It's we all need to feel useful, right? Yeah. To our families, to people. So a job that accommodates you is a huge. I think your book is going to be very important.
Yeah, I was very passionate about the topic, and like you just said, I felt like schizophrenia took so much from me. And getting a job just was another thing that I felt like I got to take back, And so a lot of my advocacy is just trying to hopefully help some other people struggling with schizophrenia be able to take back stuff like I have, like the ability to drive, the ability to be able to work a job, and the ability to, have a healthy, functional relationship, all things that I lost because of, my diagnosis. And so I'm just grateful to take some of those things back. And when I was asked to write about this topic, I was like, you guys are not going to be able to stop me from writing about this topic. And so yeah, I'm very excited about it. And it's supposed to come out at the end of this year. And I'm going to be taking it all over, doing book tours, and trying to meet with some of the people who have followed me on social media for years and who have supported all of my advocacy efforts. And I would like to also get in front of more legislators to go over some of the facts about, how they can help make sure that employers are doing what they need to do to accommodate people, because there are ADA laws that are not being followed and people that are being taken advantage of in the workplace. And there's a lot more that, not just employers can do, but legislators can do too.
There's an aspect of this too that I don't think that people talk about or think about enough. And that is that there are people with certain kinds of disabilities, including mental health issues, that actually make them better for lots of jobs than other people. And, I think back to before my son ever got sick, I'm a painter and I ran a painting company. And I had a woman who worked for me who had bipolar. And I didn't know that much about any of it, but I look back on it now and I realized, I had accommodated a little bit. That became sort of, I just did that intuitively. It wasn't some sort of big political decision, but she had the perfect bipolar for this job. All the things that were kind of symptoms and byproducts of her bipolar were things that were tailored so perfectly to what I needed her to do. She was one of the best employees I ever had. And I think that people can just think out of the box a little bit. That's just one vague example. I mean, there's so many examples of people who are differently abled, but that makes them specifically better for certain jobs.
I was super shocked to find out that when I started working, I had just come out of jail, and it was already hard enough to find a job. So I took the first job I could, which was production and manufacturing. And I quickly found out that roles like that were not for me, not only because they were hard on me, but safety wise, a person struggling with an illness like mine and recovering and still having symptoms shouldn't be doing jobs that are on a forklift, stuff like that. But I did find that when I transitioned to office roles, specifically for me, it was sales, because I had worked so hard to regain my voice and my, uh, a lot of people with schizophrenia isolate, and that's what I did for a very long time. And so when I was able to like find my voice again and communicate with people again, I did really well in sales, because all I wanted to do was talk to people. Rarely was it about what I was selling. It was just me talking to people. And like, I did really well at that because, I had spent so many years alone and struggling and felt like no one, cared about who I was or what I did. And so I just, I was in a job where I could literally just talk to people, feel, so feel like I was always surrounded by people, feel so social. And that was the perfect job for me. And that was the job I held until I started doing advocacy and social media full time.
I'd like to go back to your desire to talk to legislators, because as Randy said, I was in the Minnesota legislature for 20 years. And I think when most legislators think of the ADA, of course, they think of wheelchairs and curb cuts, and a lot of people think the ADA was physical disabilities. And if they do go further, then they think of people with developmental disabilities. But I think people with mental illnesses who have totally different needs for accommodations aren't generally thought of. And also people with schizophrenia are often not at the table. I think you and Michelle and Gabe and many others now are the exceptions. And so for the fact that you can speak for people with schizophrenia or schizoaffective, I hope that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. What I saw too was and I said this in my book too, when I was first diagnosed, a doctor told me, one of the doctors who wasn't in my care team, but someone I met with, basically told me that I would never work. He said I should get comfortable being on disability because I would never be able to work again. That's what an actual doctor told me. And so imagine that, I felt so discouraged. Who am I to, doubt a medical professional? But that's, I'm very glad that I didn't listen and that I did try to get back to work and that I worked so hard to, fight for accommodations in the workplace and make sure that I could work a job. And, I wouldn't have done that if I had just listened to that doctor and given up. And I'm afraid that's happening more than people are talking about. I think a lot of people are being told, even people who are finding success with medication and treatment are being told that they should just plan on being on disability forever and not trying to work. And I think, working is just one part of life, but I think what it does is, for me, it gave me hope. I'm like, well, if I can do this, I can do all the things I wasn't able to do, because so many people told me after my diagnosis, I wouldn't be able to drive. I wouldn't be able to work. I wouldn't be able to, maintain relationships, not just like romantic relationships, but friends and family members. And so I do all of those things now. And I think the job was just one portion of that, people kept telling me I wouldn't be able to do it. And I just felt the need to prove them wrong.
I'm actually shocked that you were told that, at age 30. I think that's the sort of thing that people were told. I thought, when they're 50 or 60, they were told back when they were young. But I'm shocked that you were told that now. People say there's Minnesota nice, and I'm not so sure people are told that here. It's how they're treated that gives them that strong impression. I don't know if anyone says you can't work, but when people go to want to work, often they spend days or months perfecting a resume or something, but they never get a chance to actually apply for a job. They might be helped to role model how they could interview, but they don't actually get an interview. I think a lot of the people who are doing those things also don't believe they can work. They're just kind of going through the motions, pretending they have a job preparation, but they don't really go at it as if it could really work. There are
Yeah.
exceptions like clubhouses. They have incredible employment programs, and I'm sure you know about that if you're connected to some of the people that you are. But it's really getting through the perception that people convey that you can't do those things, that I think is just as damning as telling you. But I'm shocked that you're told as well at your
Yeah.
young age.
Well, there's always, somebody had to graduate bottom of their class in medical school. So you never know who you're going to see.
Yeah.
And they still call them doctor. So we are getting near the end of our time. And I do want to mention for anyone who's listening that if your loved one or you is on Social Security disability, there is a program called Ticket to Work where you are allowed and encouraged to work. And there are certain limits. I think it's 9 months of working as much as you want. And then it's just, then you limit the amount you're, quote, allowed to learn and earn in a month, and keep your Social Security. So there is a way to keep your SSDI, because even if your disability is under control, it's still a disability. So if you do want to go to work and you're afraid you'll lose your disability, it's not something that your disability insurance, I should say, your SSDI, it's not something that happens right away. A good job coach will help you, and I'm sure you know this, Kody, because you're trained in peer support, will help you understand what Ticket to Work is. You can try working, and there is a process by which you can ease your way back into the work world. And if it turns out you don't need SSDI anymore, then, that's what happens. But often, so there is a way. I want to make sure in the few minutes that we have left that you have a chance to talk about anything we haven't asked you about, like, your 1.5 million TikTok followers or your work on Cameo. Like, what would you like to tell us that we haven't yet asked you?
Yeah, I mean, and we mentioned it, but I don't think by name. I do host the Unseen and Unheard podcast, and that's been an amazing experience. I've been able to interview several schizophrenia advocates, and the last episode was actually with my mom, and I got to talk to her about both of our diagnoses, but also what it was like having to watch her son go through the same diagnosis she went through. And that podcast has been just such a huge turning point for me, because I think, as much as I do advocacy, it's so important to keep learning. And I learned something from every person in that series. And so the Unseen and Unheard podcast, it is available on all podcasting apps or sites. But it also lives on the hopeforschizophrenia.com website. And that's a great resource for parents, family members, or people who are newly diagnosed. A lot of good resources on there. And then, you did mention all my social media, and that's really just been a way for me to continue spreading these messages, telling my stories. And so, if you want to find me on any social media, as you said, my username is Schizophrenic Hippie on everything. And, when it comes down to it, social media is really why I'm able to do all this. It was the reason that people started hearing my story and started showing me that there was an interest in having people better understand schizophrenia. So I'm super grateful for all of that. And my last message, I always try to remind people who are newly diagnosed that it doesn't have to be a death sentence. If you are able to find medication that works for you, and you're hearing this and you are able to recognize that you have the diagnosis, those are just the beginning steps. And despite, like I said, so many people told me I wouldn't be able to do all the things that I am actively doing. And so if you're able to get the help you need, please don't let it be the end of the road. It should just be the beginning.
Awesome. And your website is kodygreen.com, Kody, and you know how to spell green.com. And all of those social media links and information about the book. And you can check out the YouTube channel and subscribe to that. And unless you have any other last words, Mindy and Mimi, I just want to say what a delight it has been to get to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you guys again
so
so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been great.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches, with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randykay.com.